Be me, Carter lead sales manager at a company that sells industrial components, real high-grade stuff. The job is simple. You get on the phone, you build relationships, you close deals. The more you sell, the bigger your bonus check is. At the end of the quarter, everything is transparent, a pure meritocracy. Our sales department is the engine that keeps the whole company running. The atmosphere is focused, competitive, but in a friendly way. Guys on the floor are always trying to one-up each other on the sales board. Lots of banter. Nobody ever complained it was a well-oiled machine that printed money until one day HR waltzed in with her. Her name is Lila. She had this look, like she'd just walked out of a protest and was deeply disappointed to find the world hadn't fixed itself yet. Her official title was something like Head of Culture and Employee Development. On her very first day, she called an all-hands meeting for the sales department. She stood there at the front of the conference room and announced that our hyper-competitive masculinity was fostering a toxic work environment. A few of us just looked at each other, completely baffled. Ivan, our top seller and a guy who never holds back, almost choked on his coffee. This toxic environment had just delivered a record-breaking quarter for the company, but apparently, results and revenue were no longer the main priority. The first email came a few days later. It was an Outlook invitation titled Empathy Circle, a safe space for dialogue. Attendance, mandatory. Time, Thursday, 2 p.m. I just stared at the time. Thursday at 2 p.m. is prime time. It's when you're hitting up clients on the West Coast just as they're getting back from lunch. It's deal closing time. The whole thing felt like a bad joke, but the mandatory tag meant we all had to shuffle into the big conference room. That Thursday, Lila was there, smiling this serene, knowing smile. She started by explaining the rules. No interruptions, no criticism, only sharing from a place of authenticity. Then she launched into this monologue about how men in the workplace, even without realizing it, use their privilege to dominate conversations and create invisible barriers for their female colleagues. As an example, she pointed out how Ivan often tells loud jokes near the coffee machine, and that this behavior, while seemingly harmless, could be interpreted as a form of auditory aggression that might suppress the female voice. Ivan just sat there, his face a perfect mask of disbelief. This is a guy who closes seven-figure deals, and his laugh is now a corporate liability. Most of the other guys just stared blankly at the table. You could practically hear them calculating their lost commissions in their heads. Annalise, one of the sharpest client managers we have, was typing away on her laptop, not even pretending to pay attention. Then Lila asked the room if anyone wanted to share their feelings about the workplace culture. Dead silence. It was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning hum after a minute of this awkwardness. I decided to just be honest. Maybe she'd get the point. I spoke up, keeping my voice neutral. I said I was feeling a bit of anxiety about a potential $50,000 deal I was supposed to be finalizing on a call. Right now, a couple of the women who were clearly on her side shot me dirty looks. Lila's smile tightened. She said she appreciated my vulnerability, but that we needed to look beyond mere financial metrics to build a truly inclusive and holistic ecosystem. I had no idea what that even meant. I just nodded and went back to staring at the table the next week. Another mandatory meeting. Same time, same place. This time, the theme was unpacking your privilege. Lila had a PowerPoint presentation. It was full of charts and abstract nouns. She insisted that every man in the room, one by one, had to speak. We were supposed to identify one way we had benefited from the patriarchy that week and how we planned to deconstruct that advantage. It was like being in the weirdest therapy session you never signed up for, and your therapist hates you when it was Abram's turn, a quiet guy who just keeps his head down and works. He mumbled something about being able to walk to his car late at night without being afraid. Lila beamed at him, telling him what a brave and important admission. that was the rest of us just gave these vague, generic answers to get it over with. We all knew it was a minefield. Anything you said could and would be used against you. The whole process was excruciating. It was an hour of our lives, every single week, flushed down the toilet in the name of corporate jargon. The real breaking point happened during the third meeting. Maybe it was the fourth. They all blur together. Now Lila was talking about emotional labor and how women in the office were unfairly burdened with it. She suggested that the men should take turns organizing the office birthday parties to redistribute this labor equitably. Ivan, who had been simmering for weeks, finally hit his limit. His phone had been buzzing on the table, and he glanced at it. It was a huge client from Germany, one we'd been trying to land for almost a year. It was early morning for them, their only window to talk. He just stood up. "Lila, I can't do this. This is a complete circus. That's our biggest potential client of the year on the line, and I'm not going to lose them to talk about who buys the cake." The room went silent. Everyone was staring at him. Lila's serene mask dropped for a second. Her eyes went cold. Then the smile was back, but it was all teeth. It was terrifying. She spoke in this slow, condescending voice, the kind people use on a child having a tantrum. "Ivan," she said, "your refusal to engage with this topic is a perfect example of what we're discussing. You're exhibiting what's known as male fragility. You're uncomfortable confronting your role in an inequitable system, so you deflect with aggression and appeals to work." She wasn't just disagreeing with him. She was psychoanalyzing him in front of his peers. "Please sit down," she continued, her voice like ice. "This is a mandatory meeting. Your behavior is disruptive and will be noted in your performance review." Ivan looked around the room, expecting someone to back him up, but no one said a word. We were all frozen. What could we say? She had the full backing of HR. He sank back into his chair, his face flushed with anger and humiliation. He'd been publicly neutered, and in that moment, watching him, I realized something critical. You couldn't fight this head on. Arguing was a trap. She controlled the language, she set the rules, and she was the judge. Trying to reason with her was like trying to punch water. You just get tired and wet. I knew right then that there had to be another way. A way to fight back without saying a single word. For the rest of the week, the mood in the office was grim. Ivan was quiet, withdrawn. The easy banter between the guys was gone, replaced by a tense silence. We were all just waiting for the next calendar invite, like waiting for a sentence. Sure enough, that Monday, it appeared. Empathy Circle, Jur 4, Addressing Defensive Masculinity, Thursday, 2 p.m. I stared at that notification for a long time. I thought about the humiliation. I thought about the wasted time. I thought about the lost sales, the lost income for my family. I thought about how they'd created a system where you were guilty by default, and your only option was to confess to things you never did, and I just decided, no. I'm done. I opened the invitation. My heart was pounding a little. I wasn't sure what the fallout would be, but it couldn't be worse than the slow death of sitting in that room every week. I clicked decline. In the little box for the reason, I didn't write an essay. I didn't complain. I wrote one simple, professional, and completely undeniable sentence. Scheduling conflict. Urgent call with a key client. I didn't mention Lila. I didn't mention the meeting's topic. I just stated a fact of my job, then I clicked send. I felt this strange sense of calm wash over me. I'd taken back a little bit of control. I didn't say anything to anyone. I didn't want to make it look like a coordinated mutiny. I just went back to my work, making calls, sending emails. About 5 minutes later, I saw Abram, the quiet guy who sits across from me, looking at his screen. He glanced over at me, a tiny, almost imperceptible smirk on his face. Then he looked back at his monitor and typed something. A moment later, he nodded to himself. Then Diego, who sits next to him, did the same. He caught my eye and gave me a slow, deliberate nod, one by one. Like dominoes falling in silence, every single man in the sales department did the same thing. Nobody spoke. Nobody had till we all found our own urgent, work-related reasons. A client demo, a proposal deadline, a follow-up call, all legitimate parts of our job. All happening at exactly 2 p.m. next Thursday. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. The day of the meeting arrived. The week had been tense. Lila seemed to be in a particularly sour mood, walking through the sales floor with her arms crossed. Watching us, she didn't say anything, but you could feel her radiating disapproval. At 1:55 p.m., she and her small group of loyal followers walked into the conference room. A few minutes later, the door opened again. She was probably expecting a flood of latecomers, but nobody came. I could see her from my desk. She stood in the doorway, looking out over the sales floor. It was a hive of activity. Every single man was on the phone, headset on, talking to clients, typing furiously. We weren't goofing off. We were working. We were working harder than ever, making up for all the lost time. She scanned the room, her eyes locking onto me for a second. I didn't flinch. I just gave her a polite, professional nod and turned my attention back to the spreadsheet on my screen, as if discussing multi-year logistics with a client. Her face was a mixture of confusion and fury. She couldn't scream at us. She couldn't accuse us of anything. We were all doing our jobs. We were being model employees. She slammed the conference room door shut. The quiet rebellion had begun. The aftermath of that first skipped meeting was strange. Lila sent out a passive-aggressive email to the whole department. Later that afternoon, it was about the critical importance of our collective journey and how disengagement from one part of the team can undermine our shared goals of creating a better workplace. It was corporate speak for "How dare you?" Nobody replied to it the next Monday. A new invitation appeared. This time the title was slightly different. Mandatory Check-in, Realigning Departmental Synergy. The time was the same. Thursday, 2 p.m., she'd capitalized the word mandatory, as if that would change anything. I declined it again. Conflict, finalizing Q3 contract with Brawley Manufacturing. And just like before, the declines started rolling in from all the other guys, one after another. A silent, unified front this time. Lila didn't wait for the meeting. On Wednesday, she started making her rounds. She tried to corner people individually. Away from their desks, she caught up with me by the water cooler. "Carter," she said, her voice dripping with fake concern, "I noticed you have a conflict again tomorrow. It's really important that everyone is present for these sessions." I kept my tone perfectly level and professional. "I know, Lila, and I'd love to be there, but the Brawley contract is at a critical stage. The director himself told me not to let anything delay it. It's a multi-million-dollar deal. I'm sure you understand." I had just used the system against her. Our sales director was an old-school guy who cared about one thing, the bottom line. There was no way Lila could argue that her synergy meeting was more important than a multi-million-dollar contract. Her smile faltered. She knew she was checkmated. "Of course," she said through gritted teeth, "the business comes first." She had the same conversation with at least 3 other guys. Each one gave her a perfectly reasonable, ironclad, business-critical excuse. Thursday came, and the conference room was once again half empty. Now the atmosphere in the office was distinctly divided. It was like an invisible wall had gone up on one side. You had the men. We were a well-oiled machine again. We were focused, efficient. We were hitting our numbers, and then some. The time we got back from those meetings was like a superpower. That's an extra hour per week, 4 hours per month, of pure, uninterrupted selling time. We started coordinating more, passing leads to each other, helping guys who were struggling to close a difficult client. There was a new sense of camaraderie, forged in silent opposition on the other side. You had Lila and her group. Their weekly meetings, from what we could hear through the glass walls, had devolved into complaint sessions. They weren't talking about synergy anymore. They were talking about us. They were complaining about the unsupportive male colleagues, the blatant disregard for the new cultural initiatives. They were spending their work time complaining about other people working. Annalise was caught in the middle. I saw her go to one more meeting after the boycott started. When she came out, she looked exhausted. She didn't talk to anyone, just went to her desk and put her headphones on the next week. She declined the meeting too. Her reason: client portfolio review. That's when I knew we were winning. Lila's frustration was becoming more and more obvious. Her passive-aggressive emails became more frequent and more demanding. She tried a new tactic. She started scheduling one-on-one cultural check-ins with each of us. They were 15-minute slots, scattered throughout the day. I accepted mine. I went into her office and sat down. She had a notepad and a pen, like she was conducting a formal investigation. She asked me how I felt about the current departmental climate. I told her the climate felt very productive. I mentioned that I was on track to have my best quarter ever. She tried to steer the conversation. But what about the team's cohesion, the sense of community? I told her the guys on the sales team had never been more cohesive. We were all helping each other hit our targets. The sense of community was great. Every answer I gave was positive, professional, and framed in the language of business performance. I was a happy, productive employee doing my job. She couldn't get anything out of me. After 15 minutes of this, she let me go. Looking more frustrated than when I'd walked in, it was the same story with everyone else. We had all, without ever discussing it, adopted the same strategy: relentless, cheerful professionalism. It drove her crazy. Her final desperate move came about a month into our silent protest. It was the end of the quarter, and the performance reports were due. Lila must have known the numbers were going to look bad for her side. So, she tried to get ahead of it. She sent an email to our sales director and CC'd the head of HR and the CEO. The email was a masterpiece of corporate doublespeak. It talked about the challenges of implementing cultural change and the resistance from entrenched mindsets. It subtly implied that the male members of the team were prioritizing individual metrics over collective well-being, and that this was a long-term cultural risk, even if it produced short-term gains. She was trying to frame our success as a problem. She was trying to argue that making the company more money was actually a bad thing. I saw the email and felt a knot in my stomach. This was a direct attack, and it went all the way to the top. She was trying to poison the well, to paint us as villains before the director even saw the numbers. I knew the next few days would decide everything. It was her narrative against our results, her words against our numbers. And in the world of sales, I knew which one was supposed to win. But I wasn't so sure anymore. I forwarded Lila's email to my private address. I didn't know why exactly. Maybe just to have a record of the sheer audacity. The attempt to reframe reality was stunning. The next few days were incredibly tense. The air in the office was thick. You could feel the divide. Lila walked around with this air of smug confidence. She genuinely believed she had won. She thought her email had checkmated us, that she'd successfully painted our competence as a character flaw. Her followers were emboldened. They'd make snide remarks just loud enough for us to hear. Things about some people only caring about their bonuses and not being team players. We ignored it all. We had an unspoken agreement. No arguments, no justifications, no drama, just work. We buried ourselves in our jobs. Our keyboards were clicking, our headsets were on. We were a fortress of productivity. Ivan, who was normally the most hot-headed among us, was a rock. He didn't rise to any of the bait. He just kept closing deals, a quiet intensity on his face, I saw Annalise in the break room one afternoon. She was getting coffee, and so was I. We were the only ones there. She didn't say much. She just looked at me, then at the sales board on the wall where the monthly numbers were displayed. My name and Ivan's were at the very top. Then she looked back at me and just gave a small, firm nod. It wasn't much, but it was enough. It was a gesture that said she saw what was really going on. She was on the side of reason. The end of the quarter finally came. The numbers were locked in. There was nothing left to do but wait for the director to call the meeting. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning. Subject: Q3 Performance Review, Sales. Attendees: the sales director, Lila, and me. I was being called in as the representative for the sales floor. My stomach did a little flip. This was it. The showdown. I spent the rest of the morning going over my team's numbers, making sure I had all the facts straight. I wasn't going to go in there with feelings. I was going in with data. When the time came, I walked up to the executive suite on the top floor. The offices up there were different, quieter, bigger, with better views. I saw Lila waiting outside the director's conference room. She was holding a leather-bound portfolio and looking at her phone, a faint, confident smile on her lips. She looked like she was about to accept an award. She saw me and her smile tightened. "Carter," she said, her voice smooth. "Ready for our little chat?" I just nodded, ready to go over the numbers. The director's admin opened the door and waved us in. The room was intimidating. A massive mahogany table, a huge screen on one wall, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Our director was already sitting at the head of the table. He was an older guy, maybe in his late 50s. He'd been in sales his whole life, from the ground up. He wasn't impressed by buzzwords. He was a man who believed in hard work and cold, hard cash. He didn't smile. He just motioned for us to sit. "Lila, Carter, let's get started." He gestured to Lila. "You requested this meeting. You can go first. Tell me what's on your mind." This was her moment. She sat up straighter, opened her portfolio, and began her speech. It was clear she had rehearsed it. She started by talking about the cultural health of the department. She used phrases like psychological safety and sustainable growth. She explained that while some superficial metrics, like raw sales numbers, might seem high for a certain segment of the team, this was indicative of a deeper cultural problem. She claimed that the men's focus on individual achievement was creating a zero-sum environment that was actively discouraging to their female colleagues. She said we were racking up cultural debt that would harm the company in the long run. She was brilliant, in a terrifying way. She was weaving this narrative where our success was actually a failure. She was trying to convince the director that the guys bringing in the most revenue were the company's biggest problem. She spoke for about 10 minutes, referencing her notes, making eye contact with the director. I just sat there, listening, letting her build her own cage. When she finished, she closed her portfolio with a soft, final thud. She looked at the director, expecting him to agree with her, to thank her for her incredible insight. The director was silent for a long moment. He hadn't taken his eyes off her while she was speaking. He just steepled his fingers and listened then. Without a word, he picked up a remote and turned on the big screen on the wall. An Excel dashboard popped up. It was the quarterly sales report, broken down by individual salesperson. He let the screen just sit there for a second, a wall of names and numbers. "All right," he said, his voice completely flat. "Let's look at the data." He started at the top of the list. "Yvonne, a 28% increase over last quarter, a personal best. Closed the big German account we've been chasing for a year." He clicked to the next name. "Carter, that's you. 32% increase. Landed the Brawley manufacturing contract. Our biggest deal of the fiscal year so far." He went down the list, one by one. "Abram, up 25%. Diego, up 22%. Every single man on the team had not only hit their target, but had significantly exceeded it. The charts next to their names were beautiful, steep green lines climbing steadily upwards. Then he got to the names of the women who had been faithfully attending Lila's meetings. His voice didn't change, but the numbers did. Down 12% from last quarter. Missed target by 18%. A 15% decline in client outreach. The charts next to their names were ugly, sloping red lines of failure. Lila was starting to look uncomfortable. Her confident posture was gone. She was shifting in her seat. Then the director stopped on one name in the middle of the pack. Annalise. He pointed to her chart on the screen with a laser pointer. "Now, this one is interesting," he said, almost to himself. Annalise's chart was a story in two parts. For the first 2 months of the quarter, her line was trending downwards, just like the other women's. But then, about 4 weeks ago, her line took a sharp turn upwards. It finished the quarter up 5%. The director turned to me. "Carter, what happened with Annalise 4 weeks ago?" I kept my answer simple and factual. 4 weeks ago is when she stopped attending the mandatory Thursday meetings due to client portfolio reviews. The director nodded slowly. He turned the laser pointer off and put the remote down on the table. The screen with its damning evidence remained on. Glowing behind him, he finally looked directly at Lila. The silence in the room was deafening. "Lila," he said, his voice still calm, but with an edge of steel in it now. "I was brought a narrative about a toxic culture of male overperformance. But what I see on this screen is a direct and undeniable correlation. I see a group of employees who stopped attending your meetings, and their performance skyrocketed. I see another group of employees who continued to attend your meetings, and their performance fell off a cliff." He leaned forward slightly. "So, you're going to explain this to me. You're going to explain how your activities, which were supposed to improve this department, have caused a multi-million-dollar swing in the wrong direction for half of my team." This was the moment of truth. All her theories, all her buzzwords, were now face-to-face with an undeniable, expensive reality. Lila just fell apart. The confident corporate warrior was gone, replaced by a flustered, panicked ideologue. She started stammering. She talked about emotional investment not showing up in quarterly reports. She said the women were processing the difficult but necessary cultural changes, and their numbers would eventually recover. She even tried to argue that the men's success was aggressive and unsustainable. The director just stared at her, his expression unchanging. He let her talk herself into a hole. When she finally ran out of steam, he turned to me. "Carter, what's your explanation for your team's performance?" I took a breath. I didn't look at Lila. I looked straight at the director. "We did our jobs," I said. "We were given an extra hour per week to focus on selling. We used it. We made more calls. We sent more emails. We closed more deals. That's it. There's no secret." The director leaned back in his chair and nodded. He looked from me to Lila, then back to the screen full of numbers. "Thank you both for your time," he said. "That will be all." The meeting was over. Just like that, I walked out of that room feeling 10 pounds lighter. Lila scurried out behind me, not making eye contact the very next morning. An email went out to the entire company from the CEO's office. It was brief, and to the point. It announced that, effective immediately, all non-essential, non-project-related departmental meetings were being suspended indefinitely, pending a full review of their impact on core business productivity. The empathy circle was dead. Lila was never seen on the sales floor again. We heard through the grapevine that she'd been reassigned. She was now the internal communications coordinator for the social outreach committee. It was a completely meaningless job in the basement of the building, a position created to make her disappear without a lawsuit. The atmosphere in our department changed overnight. It was like a cloud had lifted. The banter came back. The tension was gone. People were smiling again. Annalise came over to my desk that afternoon. "Nice work in there," she said with a grin. "Glad someone finally decided to talk about the numbers." The women who had been Lila's followers were suddenly very quiet. They stopped complaining and just got back to work, trying to salvage their disastrous quarter a couple of weeks went by. Things were completely back to normal, maybe even better than before. Then we heard the news. Lila had quit. She couldn't stand her new non-job, her loss of power. She was gone that night. I was scrolling through LinkedIn out of curiosity, and there it was. A long post from her. It was a vague, self-pitying screed about her time at the company. She wrote about how she had bravely tried to implement forward-thinking cultural change, but was met with systemic resistance from an entrenched patriarchal mindset. She said the corporate world wasn't ready for her vision. The post had about 50 likes, mostly from people with similar job titles at other companies. I just laughed and closed the laptop the next day. The director called a meeting. It was just for the guys who had overperformed. My guys. He invited Annalise too. We all filed into the conference room. The same one where we'd been lectured and humiliated. The director stood at the front, holding the final, printed quarterly report. He didn't mention Lila at all. He didn't have to. He just looked at all of us and said, "Excellent work. You carried this company last quarter. As a thank you, on Friday, we're all going to the best steakhouse in the city. The good one. It's on the corporate card." He looked straight at me and Ivan, and then he winked. That Friday, we were all sitting around a big table, eating the best ribeyes I've ever had, drinking good beer. There were no speeches about synergy, no lectures on privilege, just a bunch of people who had worked hard and were being rewarded for it for the first time in a long time. You could just be a guy doing a good job, and that was enough TFW. You realize the most powerful weapon against nonsense isn't arguing. It's just being better at your job and silently clicking decline.